"Hey old man, you playing cafeteria worker or something?" The voice was sharp, laced with the raw confidence of youth. Staff Sergeant Evan Cross wiped the sweat from his forehead as he walked toward the elderly man in the corner of the mess hall. He stopped right in front of him, his shadow falling across the counter. The Special Operations Command's main base dining facility was filled with its usual midday chaos. Metal trays clanged, operators shouted, jokes and laughter filled the air. But, right now, in that corner, there was a tense, uncomfortable silence. The old man stood behind the serving counter. He was 72, maybe older. His back was slightly hunched, his hands dry and cracked. His white kitchen apron was clean but worn, the edges frayed. His hair was silver white, his face carved with deep lines. His eyes were a calm blue, but there was something in them. Something distant, unreachable, heavy. His name was Richard Stone. Richard didn't lift his head. He simply lowered the serving spoon slowly onto the rice peel-off, measure and deliberate, placing a portion onto the tray. His movements were so careful, so economical, it was like watching a bomb disposal tech at work. "Yo, my grandpa hear me." The soldier next to Evan, Lieutenant Jake Morrison, laughed. He was young, handsome, muscular, Delta Force. His black beret was a badge of pride. Maybe he left his hearing aid at home. The operators around them turned to look. That section of the mess hall was now filled with attention. A Green Beret nudged his buddy with his elbow. "Here we go again," he whispered. Richard Stone placed the tray on the counter and slid it toward Evan. He said nothing. His eyes didn't even meet Evan's. Just an empty, distant expression as he served and took a step back. That silence made Evan angrier. People were supposed to respond to him, show respect. He was a staff sergeant, special operations, one of the nation's elite units. And the man in front of him was just a cook, just an old civilian. "You hearing me?" he asked again, louder this time. "I'm talking to you." Richard still didn't answer. He simply turned to the next person in line, a young female soldier, Specialist Mia Torres. She'd noticed the situation and felt uncomfortable. "Thank you, sir," she said softly, took her tray, and quickly moved away. But Evan wasn't done. He turned to his buddies standing nearby. "I swear, this guy hasn't said a single word in 3 months. Not one." "Maybe he's mute," another soldier said. "Laughing, or just senile," Jake added. "That's what happens when you get old. Brain just melts away." Laughter erupted. Evan grinned, savoring his victory, but Richard Stone didn't move. He still stood in the same spot, hands folded in front of him, head slightly bowed. As if this wave of insults couldn't even reach him. On the other side of the mess hall, leaning against the wall, Master Sergeant Marcus Wade watched the scene unfold. He was in his early 40s, a former Army Ranger. He'd earned his tan beret many years ago. His face was hard, his eyes those of an experienced warrior. He watched the young soldiers mock the elderly cook and felt a knot of unease form in his gut. Something was wrong. The old man was too calm, too disciplined. This wasn't the kind of discipline a civilian would show. Marcus had spent years in war zones, in hard operations. And he knew one thing very well. Real warriors rarely shouted, rarely reacted, because losing control meant death. This old man had never lost control. Marcus looked carefully at Richard's posture, the position of his hands, the angle of his head. Then his eyes drifted to Richard's arm, his left arm. A thin, wrinkled wrist peeking out from under the white apron. And there, very faint, almost invisible something. Marcus's heart stopped for a moment. Evan was still standing at the counter. He was enjoying himself now. "Come on, Grants. Say something to us. Where you from? What backwoods town did you crawl out of before coming here to play cook?" Richard was silent again. But this time, he made a very slight, almost imperceptible movement. He placed his right hand over his left forearm. His fingertips rubbed gently, as if there was pain there. Or a memory Jake didn't notice. He continued, "Maybe he's a draft dodger, never served. That's why he won't top no records, nothing." A few more soldiers laughed. But some were starting to feel uncomfortable. They grabbed their meals and quickly returned to their tables. Master Sergeant Marcus, however, moved closer. "Slow. measured steps. He walked through the crowd, his eyes locked on Richard's arm. When he reached the counter, he stopped. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice low but authoritative. "Get your food. Go sit down." Evan turned. "So Marcus." For a moment he resisted. "Master Sergeant, we were just—" I said, "Sit down." The tone was final. Evan couldn't argue. He shrugged. All right," and walked away with his friends, but as he left, he looked back one more time. "We'll talk to you later, old man," he muttered. Marcus stayed at the counter. Now it was just him and Richard. The mess hall was still loud, but this corner felt isolated. Marcus looked carefully at Richard. The man still wasn't looking at him, but Marcus could see it. The left arm, slightly visible beneath the apron. And there, very faint, a maroon-colored stain. A tattoo. Old, very old. The lines had almost faded away. Marcus's breath caught. "Maroon. Beret." "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice completely different now, respectful. "What's your name, sir?" Richard finally lifted his head. His eyes met Marcus's. And in that moment, Marcus saw it. There wasn't just age in those eyes. There were wars, losses, victories, silence. "Richard," the old man said. His voice was dry, like the first word from unused vocal cords. "Richard Stone." Marcus swallowed. "Sir, I need to make a phone call. Please stay right here." Richard's lips curved, slightly, not a smile, more like ... acceptance. "I'm not going anywhere." Marcus turned and walked quickly out of the mess hall. In the hallway, he pulled out his cell phone, scrolled through his contacts. His hands were trembling slightly. General Thomas Grant, Shadow Command, former commander. Now retired but still consulting. Marcus had worked with him for years. And if this tattoo really meant what he thought, the call had to be made. Now, the phone rang 3 times, then a voice. "Marcus?" "What's up, General?" Marcus's voice was tense. "I need to talk to you urgently. There's a man here, an old cook." But he stopped, couldn't find the right words. "But what?" "He has a maroon beret tattoo on his arm. 1980s style, special marking inside." There was a long silence on the line. So long that Marcus thought the call had dropped. But then, the general's voice returned, this time completely different. Cold, sharp, urgent. "What's his name?" "Richard Stone." Another silence, this time. Marcus could hear the general's breathing. It had quickened. "Marcus, listen very carefully. Don't let that man out of your sight. Nobody touches him. Nobody bothers him. I'll be there in 15 minutes. I'm also calling the base commander. Don't say anything. Just stay with him. Understood, General?" "But." "No buts. That man isn't just a cook." The line went dead. Marcus stared at his phone, then at the mess hall door. From inside came laughter, the sound of trays, and there, behind the counter, Richard Stone still stood silently. Marcus stayed in the hallway, standing guard, because now he understood. That mess hall didn't just contain an old man. It contained a legend. 10 minutes later, the base command center erupted into chaos. Colonel David Wright, the base commander, was sitting at his desk when his phone rang. Secure line. The caller was his old commander friend, General Thomas Grant. "Tom? What's going on?" David asked. "David, go to your mess hall, now. There's a cook there, named Richard Stone." "I know, we hired him a few months ago." "Quiet, calm guy. What about him?" David ... double quotes. Tom's voice was shaking. The colonel had known his friend for 25 years. He'd never heard him like this. "That man isn't a civilian. He served in the 1980s Special Operations Task Force, Maroon Beret Commando Unit, classified operations." David froze. "What are you saying?" "He has a file, classify. I commanded him for years. Much later, after he was injured, he left the system. Records were wiped, his pension was cut, he was forgotten. But he didn't forget. Why didn't he say anything? Why didn't he apply? Why didn't he? Because that's how it was. We were in the shadows, none of us existed. You won't find his file unless you search for it. But the maroon tattoo ... that tattoo is real. And if someone saw it, everyone's about to know." The colonel shot to his feet. "I'm on my way." The line went dead. In the mess hall, the lunch period was winding down. Soldiers were slowly dispersing, but Evan and his friends were still there, sitting at their table, joking, laughing. What if Gramps really can't talk? How are we gonna mess with him then? Jake said. Maybe we go during the evening shift, search his locker, another soldier suggested. Maybe find something, ID or whatever. Evan shrugged. Whatever. He's not that important, but Master Sergeant Marcus was still standing near the counter. He hadn't approached Richard, just waited at eye level, distant but protective. Richard was washing dishes, wiping the counter, doing his normal work. But now, every movement seemed to be in slow motion, because Marcus knew that very soon, everything was about to change. The door opened. Colonel David Wright entered. Behind him were two guard privates. His uniform was impeccable, his rank insignia gleaming. The soldiers still in the mess hall immediately jumped to their feet. "Sir," they shouted, snapping to attention. The colonel saluted them, but his eyes were elsewhere, searching for the counter, and he found it. Richard Stone had slowly placed his dishcloth on the counter. He rubbed his hands together, lifted his head. The colonel walked toward him, slow, measured steps. Everyone in the mess hall went silent, only the sound of the colonel's boots could be heard. When he reached the counter, he stopped. Only a few inches separated him from Richard. The colonel's eyes met Richard's. And there, in the old man's calm face, something had changed. There was acceptance, exhaustion. "Captain Stone," the colonel said, his voice clear and loud. "It's an honor to see you, sir." And then, right there, in the middle of that mess hall, a colonel saluted a cook. Everyone in the mess hall froze. Evan's mouth hung open. Jake had half risen from his table, but didn't know what to do. The other soldiers looked at each other in shock. Richard Stone slowly raised his hand. A trembling, old hand, and he returned the salute. The movement was flawless. Military. The salute of a former captain. The colonel lowered his salute. "My apologies, sir. Please forgive the treatment you've received at this base." Richard's voice was stronger this time. "It's nothing, Colonel. I was just doing my job." "Your job," the colonel repeated, "was not to serve at this base." "If I had known." "You didn't need to know," Richard interrupted, soft but firm. "The past is the past." At that moment, the back door of the mess hall opened, and in walked, dressed in civilian clothes but with a military bearing, General Thomas Grant. He was in his 60s, his silver hair cut short. His eyes were sharp, his steps determined. His eyes found Richard, and he stopped. For 15 seconds, he just looked. His face showed deep sorrow, deep respect. Then, with quick steps, he approached. "Richard," he said, his voice hoarse, "I didn't know you were here." Richard smiled. For the first time, very slight but genuine. "Tom, it's been a long time." The general came to the counter, extended his hand. Richard shook it. Two old warriors, shaking hands, a wordless communication passing between them. Years of operations, of losses. "Why didn't you say something?" Tom asked. "Nobody asked. Your pension was cut, your medical benefits are gone. You have nothing." Richard shrugged. "I'm alive. That's enough." The general sighed. Then he turned to the crowd in the mess hall. Everyone was still at attention, but now, filled with curiosity. "Let me tell you something," the general said, his voice strong and clear. "You see this man, a cook, old, quiet. But let me tell you who he is." You could hear a pin drop in the mess hall. This man joined the Special Task Force in 1982, in Southeast Asia, Maroon Beret Commando. In his generation, only 30 people are in that beret, 30, and today, only 4 are still alive. Evan's face turned white. In 1984, during a cross-border operation, his 12-man team was ambushed. Enemy count was 80. Most of his teammates were killed. But Richard Stone fought for 14 hours, alone. He was wounded, out of ammo. But he carried 6 wounded teammates, one by one. Across a 3-kilometer mountain trail, the silence deepened. Finally, the helicopter came. Richard had passed out. He had 11 bullet wounds in his back. But he'd saved 6 men, one of them ... was me. The general's voice cracked. He gave me life, and then, he asked for nothing. No medal, No promotion. Nothing. He just went back. Continued his duty, silently, in the shadows. Colonel David bowed his head. Master Sergeant Marcus wiped his eyes, and Evan ... Evan wished the floor would swallow him whole. General Thomas Grant continued. His voice was calmer now but hadn't lost its weight. In 1987, during an operation, bomb fragments embedded in Richard Stone's back damaged his spine. He couldn't fight anymore. He could walk, but his old strength was gone. The army quietly retired him. His file was closed. Why? Because that operation officially never happened. We were ghost tactic. We weren't in the records. The soldiers in the mess hall were completely silent now. Some were crying, especially the experienced ones, because they knew. Classified operations were like that. Heroism disappeared into silence. After that, Richard returned to civilian life. He had no income. His pension was cut, no records. He found work in the private sector, cleaning, construction, kitchen work. He worked everywhere, but he never complained. Never rebelled, because he was a soldier. It was duty's command. The general paused. Looked at Richard, and now, I find him here. Still working silently, still with honor. And you, he said, his eyes turning to Evan. You called him old man. Evan's knees trembled. He couldn't stand. He collapsed to the ground. The general approached him. Stand up. Evan tried to rise, but his hands were shaking. Look at me, the general said. You're a young soldier. You're strong, talented. But you're forgetting something. Strength isn't just in your muscles. Strength is here. He tapped his chest, and here. He tapped his head. But most importantly, here. Then he tapped his heart. In respect, in humility, Evan bowed his head. I'm sorry, General, not to me, to him. Evan turned to Richard. The old man was still behind the counter. There was no anger in his face, just exhaustion, deep understanding. Evan approached, on his knees. Captain, I didn't know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Richard looked at him silently, then extended his hand, touched Evan's shoulder. Stand up, son, the past is the past, but don't forget again. Everyone standing before you has a story, and you can't judge without knowing that story. Evan was crying now. Please forgive me, please, Richard smiled. I forgive you. The general turned to the colonel. David, something's going to change on this base. Richard Stone will no longer work here as a cook. You're right, General. We'll find him an appropriate position. No, Richard interrupted. I'm staying here, in the kitchen. Doing my job, but, Colonel, Richard said, his voice firm. I fought for years, lost a lot, but I never lost one thing, my dignity. And now, I want to serve on this base, but unchanged, silently, because that's who I am. The general smiled. You were always stubborn, Richard, and you always talked too much. They both laughed. The laugh of old friends, old warriors, painful, but beautiful. From that day on, the mess hall changed. Richard Stone still stood behind the counter, still quiet. But now nobody called him old man. Nobody rushed him. Soldiers, as they got in line, saluted him. Good morning, Captain. Enjoy your meal, sir. And Richard kindly replied to each one. Thank you, son. A week later, Colonel David Wright organized an official ceremony. In the base's main courtyard, all personnel gathered. Maroon Berets, special operators, training units. Everyone was there, and during the ceremony, Richard Stone was, finally, albeit late, restored his retirement pension and medical benefits. His old file was opened, records corrected. General Thomas Grant personally presented it. We're late, the general said. But better late than never. Richard, looking at his documents, teared up. Thank you. When the ceremony ended, young soldiers lined up. One by one, they shook Richard's hand, apologized, showed their respect. And Evan was last. He approached, extended his hand. Captain, I want to learn something from you. Richard looked curiously. What do you want to learn? How can you stay so calm? How do you not get angry? Not shout. Richard took a deep breath. Because, son, anger isn't strength. Anger is weakness. True strength is in control. True strength is in patience. I fought for years. And I learned that the most dangerous enemy is the anger within ourselves. Evan nodded. I understand. Also, Richard added with a slight smile, I'm old. I don't have the energy to get angry anymore. They both laughed. Months passed. Richard Stone still worked in the mess hall, but now he had helpers. Young soldiers voluntarily came to help him, not just for meal service, but to get to know him. In the evenings, a small group would gather in the mess hall. Richard would tell them stories. What he experienced in wars, his teammates, his mistakes, his victories. War, he would say, isn't like in the movies. There's no heroism there. There's only survival, and if you're lucky, you keep your buddy alive too. The young soldiers listened carefully. Because he wasn't giving theoretical knowledge, he was sharing real experience. One evening, Evan asked, Captain, do you ever regret it? I mean, you did all this, but then you were forgotten. Nobody knew. Do you ever regret it? Richard thought for a long time. Then answered, no, because I did my duty. Even if nobody knew, I knew, and for me, that was enough. Regret is only felt for things we didn't do, not for things we did. Evan wrote these words in his notebook. That night, in his barracks, he thought for hours and made a decision. He wanted to be not just a strong soldier, but a good person. One day, an incident occurred in the mess hall. A young private accidentally dropped a tray. Food scattered on the floor. The kid panicked, started apologizing. Other soldiers laughed, mocked, but Evan immediately rushed to his side. It's okay, brother, he said. Come on, let's clean it up together. The two of them knelt on the floor together, gathered the spilled food. And Evan, in that moment, looked into Richard's eyes. The old man was watching from behind the counter, and he smiled with pride. That smile was the most valuable medal for Evan. That night, Richard sat alone in his small quarters. He looked at the tattoo on his arm. It had faded, almost erased, but it was still there. He closed his eyes and went back. 1984, Southeast Asia, a mountain camp. Richard was a young captain, 28 years old, strong, fast, determined. He'd just earned his Maroon Beret. His team was 12 men. Special Task Force, classified operation. Mission: neutralize a terror camp across the border. Midnight, they advanced silently, but someone had seen them. Set an ambush, suddenly opened fire. Chaos erupted. Bullets, explosions, screams. Richard's team scattered. Some were immediately killed. Some were wounded. The radio broke. They couldn't call for help. Richard found 6 wounded, hid them in a cave, then went back, fought the enemy alone, for hours. When his ammo ran out, he used a knife. When the knife broke, he used his hands. In the morning, helicopters came. Richard was found unconscious in front of the cave. His back riddled with bullets, but 6 men were alive. In the hospital, after surgery, Major Thomas Grant at the time sat beside him. You saved me, Tom said, his eyes wet. You saved me and 5 other men. Richard couldn't speak. Too weak, but he nodded. Tom held his arm. I want to give you something, a promise. This team will never forget you. And one day, this nation will know you. But that day never came. Weeks later, the survivors in Richard's team gave him a gift, a small tattoo machine. And Tom personally carved it into his arm, a maroon-colored beret, with 3 lightning bolts inside. This tattoo, Tom said, is the bond between us. You may not be in the official records, but in our hearts, you're a hero. Richard carried that tattoo from that day on, and never forgot. Richard opened his eyes, in his room, alone. But he didn't feel alone anymore, because now, on this base, people knew him. He wasn't just a cook, he was a legend. Winter had come. The base courtyard was covered in snow. The mess hall was warm and peaceful. Richard stood in his usual place, behind the counter, but now, there was a difference. Above the counter, a small plaque hung. Captain Richard Stone, Maroon Beret Commando, 1980–1987. Heroism lives in silence. Soldiers, as they got in line, looked at that plaque with respect. Evan got his tray that day, looked at Richard. "Good morning, Captain. What's on the menu today?" Richard smiled. "Beans. Your favorite," Evan laughed. "You know me." "I do. I know all of you now." As Evan headed to his table, he turned back. "Captain, I want to ask something." "Ask, son." If time could go back, would you do the same things again? Would you still stay silent?" Richard thought, then nodded. "Yes, because heroism isn't done for applause. It's done to do the right thing. And I always tried to do the right thing." Evan wiped his eyes. "I want to be like you." Richard placed his hand on Evan's shoulder. "You already are. You just don't know it yet." That evening, at the base command meeting, Colonel David made an announcement. "Soldiers, we're starting a new tradition on this base. Every year, a soldier will be selected. Not just for being strong, but for being humble, respectful, and honorable. And this award will be called the Stone Honor Badge." Applause rose. And Richard, in his room, when he heard that announcement, cried for the first time in years. From Happiness. Richard Stone's story reminds us, true heroes aren't always in the spotlight. Sometimes they serve silently, in the shadows, but they're never forgotten. Because they're remembered not for what they did, but for who they are. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to Humantruthtales, because every veteran has a story, and we're here to tell those stories. See you in the next video. Remember, respect is more important than strength.